Okay, we're going to go live. Welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to see such a great turnout to the second meeting of the committee that is looking at the review on Maple Ridge Elementary School and Shubenacadie District Elementary School. My name is Carla Engelhardt, and I was appointed by the superintendent of the school board to act as facilitator to support the committee through this work. And it's my pleasure to see all of you here tonight. This is the second public meeting, as you know, and at the first public meeting, there was a suggestion that for those people who couldn't arrange for babysitters or couldn't be here physically, that it would be great to be able to live stream the event. And so the school board has provided some great technical support so that we do have the ability to live stream. So thank you for the suggestion, and welcome to those of you who are joining us on the live stream feed. We've got a lot to accomplish tonight because you had a lot of questions when we got together for the first meeting, and the committee's been hard at work. And I will introduce the committee in just a minute, but first I'm just going to run through the way that we're going to approach the evening. Okay. First of all, we're going to just stop with a little bit of after I introduce the committee, we'll start with a little bit of why are we here, so what was the reason for the review, what triggered that. We'll talk about the work that the committee has done since the first public meeting. You'll recall that the committee started their work back November 1st, and they've been meeting significantly since that time, gathering information in order to help inform the recommendation that is asked of them for the school board. We'll also talk about the questions that you asked, and we're going to endeavor to provide as much information for you as it relates to those questions as possible. We think we've hit all of those questions, and it's going to take us a little bit of time to get through that. So our intention is, between myself and the chair of the committee, Carrie, we'll be covering off some important information. And then we're actually going to let you know some of the options that the committee has been considering, and then narrow it down to those that are still on the table for consideration, with an explanation about why some of those other options have been removed from the table, so to speak. And then, in order to be able to hear from as many of you as possible, we are going to move into 3 separate groups, each for a time frame of 20 minutes, so that we can hear your perspectives on the 3 options that are still under consideration by the committee. And at the end of the 20-minute period, we'll ask each of you to move to another station so that, in fact, you get an opportunity to weigh in on all of the options that the committee is still considering. The intention of the public meetings is to get information, input, and feedback from you. And as you saw in the first meeting, for those of you who participated, it was difficult to hear from everybody. And breaking out into those smaller groups will afford more people the opportunity, and hopefully everyone will have a chance to weigh in, and that's really the intention. So this first 40 minutes is about giving you information, and then when we break away for 20 minutes, 3 consecutive sessions, we'll get a chance to hear from you. And then we're going to reconvene in the gym for about 15 minutes so that we can talk to you about the next steps and also just remind you of the next public meeting, which is intended to be the final public meeting. So that's the way that we're going to approach the agenda. I just want to take a minute to introduce the committee over there. The greeter, the friendly greeter that you met, many of you know him, Mr. Norval Mitchell. And then we have Courtney is sitting there at the table, and she is our recording secretary. She works with the school board. And then, of course, we've got our chair that many of you became familiar with last time if you didn't already know her from the community. That's Carrie Robson. And then we have Michelle Laverty sitting next to her, Cindy White sitting next to her, Lori Malcolm, and then on the end, we've got bookends, gentlemen, don't we? We've got John A. McDonald on the end there. And absent in his physical presence, but definitely here in spirit, is Chris McPhee, who isn't able to join us tonight because of his work commitments. And as I mentioned when we started, my name is Carla Engelhardt, and I'm the facilitator appointed by the school board. So that is your committee. And when the committee met, they made a commitment to each other and to the process, and as well to the committee or the community whose interests they're taking into consideration in this. And they identified these values and guiding principles to help them with their work. And as the objective third party that's been working with this group, I can tell you that for a group of volunteers, they have been incredibly committed to trying to fulfill the mandate that has been asked of them. And they've dedicated a lot of their own hours as volunteers to try to do the best job of getting good evidence upon which to make a recommendation to take to the school board. And as you can see, These are individuals who also are parents of schools that attend these children, and as well we have business and community representatives on the committee. So the respect for each other and the process, respect the diversity and the interests of the communities that are potentially affected here, commitment and accountability, also working together as a cohesive team. And I can say that even though the work is very difficult, and the pay is really poor, isn't it, group? Yeah, they've been working together very strongly to try to find the best possible option for this community, or for the communities. And as well, they've made a commitment to be as transparent as possible. So I'm hoping that you're staying up to date with the minutes that are on the website, as well as any presentations that they've received formally are also included, and formal correspondence that is sent our way is also included on the website. So that's one of the mechanisms for staying open so that you know what's going on in the process. Whoops. All right, I just want to talk a little bit about the why we're here, and I apologize for those of you that were here for meeting 1 and already know this, but it's important context and background. And first of all, it's provincially driven. This is not the only area or school area that is under review. But the mandate was established to conduct the review of these 2 schools according to the provincial policy from the Nova Scotia Department of Education and Early Childhood Development School Review Policy. And part of the obligation in that is to strike a committee comprised of committee members, community members, and parents, and also to engage the public so they can hear from you what your perspectives are and any ideas that you might have in terms of the best recommendation. And at the end of the day, they're required to submit a written report with recommendations, and ultimately the school board will make the decision. So it was triggered, of course, by the lease at this P3, Maple Ridge, coming up, and consideration had to be given about whether or not there was a continuation of the lease, whether there was the decision to purchase the school, etc. We also know that the enrollment across the school board has been declining, and specifically there has been a decline of 17.8% at Maple Ridge over the past 10 years, and the school programs aren't optimized, and I'm going to talk in just a few minutes about what that actually means, but I also want to add that the school policy actually states that the school review must include any schools that might be impacted by a potential closure, potentially a receiving school, but also those that might actually represent some options for consideration to optimize the schools. And that is why Maple Ridge Elementary, Shubenacadie District Elementary are being considered, and also Winding River Consolidated is being considered, although not considered for closure, but potentially as a receiving school. So that's the rationale behind all 3 schools being under consideration. And it's also noteworthy that Shubenacadie's utilization is at about 37%, and the enrollment has declined 26% over the last 10 years. So there's been some significant decline, which hasn't led to optimization. That is very difficult to see from where you're at, but you can go online and see the process. But it's safe to say that the committee started their first meeting back November 1st, and they've met weekly to 2 times a week in some situations since that duration, with the exception of a little break at Christmas time. And tonight we're at the 2nd public meeting, and what we're bringing to you for your consideration and input are the 3 draft options that are still under consideration by this committee. And ultimately there needs to be a report because the information has to go forward regarding that lease in May. So there's a trickle-back effect. The 3rd public meeting is slated for February to look at the final recommendation, and then we'll proceed from there. So the objectives of the process, and I apologize because I have to look backwards to see what I'm reading, through reorganization of the schools to optimize the provision of educational services. So I said that this was triggered by the lease decision, but it's also an opportunity to look at how do you actually optimize the educational experience. And as I mentioned, I've got a slide that talks a little bit more about that, so I'll go into more detail. The process has to ensure that you consider the bigger picture, not just the individual school, and recognize the impact or potential impact on the community, and to look at the community and get them engaged to consider some of the potential solutions as well. It's really important that good information and evidence provide the foundation for some of the recommendations. Openness and transparency is a key hallmark of the process. And ultimately, the committee's job is to assist the decision makers. The committee is not the decision-making body. They are to make a recommendation that then goes to the school board, who ultimately makes the decision about the schools in consideration. And it's really looking at some potential innovative solutions that are going to move beyond the status quo to optimizing the schools. And so we were given a clear mandate, the committee was given a clear mandate, status quo was not an option. So as much as we know that change is very difficult, and schools are very near and dear to the hearts of the communities and the parents and the children and the businesses, given the statistics that we'll be sharing with you shortly, I think that you'll have to agree that there's some significant need for a good examination of what can be done in order to be able to optimize these schools. So the committee has been considering a lot of information, and I'll be sharing with you in a minute some of the presentations and information they've received since the first meeting. They have been looking at, and of course are governed by, a set of terms of reference and the policies that have been provided, some provincial and some the CCRSB policies. Of course, the community input. And for those of you that don't know, we have our own email address, and we invite and have received some feedback from the community through that mechanism. We appreciate that. We're looking very closely at student enrollment, both historical and also projected and current. Also, really important to think about access and equity to different programming, maximizing the use of the school facilities, and using the resources in a way that makes sense, financial, human, and otherwise. And we also had to take into consideration, the committee's taking into consideration the geographical areas, transportation, and some of those other challenges. And I'm pretty pleased to say that just through checking out and validating some of the data that they saw in some of the original information, there's actually been a change that has been very positive as it relates to busing. So a question triggered an investigation, and they discovered that there was a challenge there. So there's been some good outcomes already as a result of that. So the committee's been busy, as I said. They've been coming together regularly. They considered their first meeting after the first public meeting was really to sort of sit and think about what we heard, and what did it mean, and therefore what does the committee need to do as a result of that. They started to gather more information. You brought forward some fantastic questions and suggestions in terms of presentations and information they needed to consider, and so that's been undertaken. And they've received a number of presentations, as well as some information sent through other means, which I'll be highlighting in a minute. All 3 schools have been toured by the committee to get a sense of what are the programs, how does the school run, et cetera. And I can tell you that there's a lot of pride in every one of the schools. And we understand how you love your schools and are very committed to making sure that that school stays open. So the committee is very aware of that, and as I said, they're parents themselves, and so they're near and dear to their hearts as well. They also had a presentation from Dr. Chris Bolter with the school board talking about some of the international research that's been done as it relates to school optimization, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And they've been posting to keep you aware of what's going on. So now I'm going to talk about school optimization really briefly, and it's difficult to distill the work that's been done into just a short snapshot, but I think that this is really important information, certainly information that I wasn't aware of before starting through this process, and I think the committee feels the same way. And global research has taken place to look at what actually makes the best experience for the student, and what they have found is that a major contributing factor to the student achievement is actually teaching quality. And next to that, they found that teaching quality improves when the teachers can actually be engaged in strategic collaboration. And what that means is that they come together to talk about, to problem solve, to plan, to discuss whether or not learning outcomes are being achieved, and to inform the way that they move forward with their teaching in order to achieve the best outcomes for the student. And in order to have that condition, you need to have a critical mass. So what that means is that you have to have enough teachers that are teaching the same grade level and or subject matter in order to be able to collaborate, learn from each other, share resources, and troubleshoot and help each other moving forward. And so the school board, not unlike some others globally, are moving forward. They've got a commitment. They're moving forward to try to achieve the school optimization. And what that means from P to 5 is that you need a critical mass in order to be able to have two teachers teaching the same elementary grade in order to be able to do that strategic collaboration. And so what that means in hard numbers is about 300 students together. I mentioned they've had a number of presentations. We started the whole process with a visit from the superintendent, from Mr. Herb Steeves, the Director of Operations, Dr. Chris Bolter, who is the Systems Development Supervisor, and they were just providing some context, welcoming the committee and thanking them for their willingness to participate, and providing the key information that started the committee in their work, as well as the invitation to seek information and that they would do everything in their power to provide that information. We also met with Kirk McCullough, who has a keen interest and awareness and knowledge in this particular school. And then Dr. Chris Bolter came in just before Christmas and talked about the school optimization. And certainly, if you would hear it from him, it would give you a lot more context than what I just provided, but hopefully you've got the essence of it. Then we had Ms. Valerie Gauthier, who is the Director of Financial Services, to come in and talk with us about budgets and finances and how decisions are made around capital spending, et cetera. And we've also had presentations by Randy Ellis, who is the Manager of Student Transportation Systems, and Mr. Herb Steeves as well came in and talked about operations and more about the terms of reference, et cetera. So those are presentations that have occurred to date, and there's others coming, which I'll get to in just a minute. You may also be interested in knowing that we did have another representative on the committee from the Shubenacadie community, and by the time we had our first meeting, he had not been able to participate due to other commitments at all with the committee. And it was just shortly following that meeting that he indicated he was not going to be able to participate. And there was somebody who came forward at meeting one and indicated an interest to participate, and it's not the committee's role to appoint people to the committee, so that information was shared with the school board. They went away and, of course, went through the appropriate process to try to seek an appointment or recommendation for someone else from the community to join the committee. And unfortunately, enough time lapsed before anything was done that the decision was made by the school board that adding another member at that late date would actually be disruptive to the process. And so the committee really labored over how do we get the perspective from this community that is a very important voice in this whole process, from an educational perspective, a cultural perspective, et cetera. And so a number of questions were actually put together and sent off to the community with the request that they provide us with some information. And so the committee recognizes the importance of hearing those issues and how they may impact different possibilities for recommendation. Now, the municipality of East Hants was asked as well to provide a presentation, and unfortunately they didn't accept the invitation to come. They did provide some information to us that you can find on the sheet that you have in front of you. We've given you the link so that you have access to the same data that was provided. And unfortunately, the timing is that the new census data is not out until later in February, so the data upon which some of those projections are made is the 2012 census data. But there is another study that's in there at that link that you can check out. And so that's information that was shared. And we've also asked the Chamber of Commerce, I think that was also a suggestion that came up in the presentation, to come out and do a presentation. They have agreed. You see on the slide February 6th, we just got a message late this afternoon that they've asked for another week because they really want to connect with their members and make sure that when they come to speak to the committee, they've had the perspectives of their members as well considered in there. So those are some of the next steps. All right, I am going to turn it over to our fearless leader, the chair, Carrie Robson, and she is going to address some of the questions that you asked at the last session.
Sure. You all fit in? Right, good evening. I know a whole lot of people here, but for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Carrie Robson. I'm a community member. I live in Milford, and I currently have 3 children attending Maple Ridge. And so I've been chosen as the chairperson of this committee. And tonight, my role in this presentation is, at our last public meeting, there was a lot of questions. I'm going to be redirected back to this mic all evening. But there was a lot of questions, and tonight what we wanted to do is bring back the information to you so that you can find out essentially what we have found out so far, what we are still gathering information on, and provide, hopefully answer most of the questions that arose from the last public meeting before we break into some small groups and get more input tonight. So a lot of the questions at our first public meeting were about enrollment and enrollment projections. We didn't have a lot of information available at the time, but we've since received quite a bit of information. So what we've done, and this PowerPoint presentation will be available online on the CCRSB website, but for tonight's purpose, what we've managed to do is to put together the enrollment. And what we're starting with, and we'll go through all three schools, is the enrollment that's coming from the long-range outlook, which is a CCRSB document. One of the questions that came up was, where do these numbers come from and what are they based on? We've had an opportunity to meet with various CCRSB staff members, as been indicated. What we know is that the historic enrollment reflects what has historically been happening at these schools for the past 5 years. The projected enrollments are based on a number of things, partially based on current enrollment and projected primary enrollments for the next year coming forward. They're also based on census information, and it's partly based on the census information and what's been happening with communities. The one thing we did query, because it had been asked at the first public meeting, is what, if any, input or any consideration was given to things like the Lance interchange, like potential development, and essentially what we've been advised is these numbers do not take into account those potential developments. So what we're seeing for the numbers is what's happening on the ground, and those numbers being projected forward without taking into account any potential growth, or I guess any new development growth. They're projecting the growth moving forward. So what we have first, and I'm not going to go through the numbers, they're going to be up online, and in fact these numbers are already online through the Long Range Outlook, is the Maple Ridge Elementary School. So it shows the historic enrollment back to 2010, brings us up to this year's current enrollment. This year's current enrollment was as of September 30th. We have not gone back to the principals to confirm whether that number remains the exact same. And then the projection forward for the next 5 years. So these are our school board numbers. On our next slide shows those same numbers for Shubenacadie. And again, the same thing. It has not taken into consideration any potential development in the Shubenacadie area, rather what's happening currently with the schools being projected forward. And so the fourth column in this shows the utilization. So at the very top, we do see the current school capacity. Shubenacadie, that's 449, and on the last column over is showing the utilization, so what the utilization of the school is. Another question that had come up at the last public meeting was with respect to utilization. How does the school board calculate that, and does that mean essentially every room in the entire school is full and being used as a classroom? What we've been advised by the school board is utilization takes into account that there needs to be rooms available for such things as music rooms, for learning centers, and those type programming support. So it's not calculated on how many rooms are in the school and let's fill those all with students. The utilization at 100% would still leave room for things like the music room and learning centers. But what we do know is that, or what we've been told, is that for elementary schools, utilization, they seek to have it at about 100% is ideal in elementary schools. At the higher levels, it actually drops off. The school board shooting for, I think, somewhere above 80%. But for elementary schools, they're looking for 100% utilization. So we see in the Shubenacadie District School, the utilization's down in the 30s essentially, which in the tour of the school, we saw that as well. There was space that was being utilized by the school, and they've done a great job of utilizing that space for various different program supports, but lots of room there in the school. So you do see that within the school. The third set of numbers from the school board we're providing here tonight is the Winding River numbers. Again, current school capacity, their enrollment and projections, where they've been the last 5 years, and where their utilization is. Based on the input we received at the last public meeting, and frankly as a committee, we knew these numbers weren't enough, so we have gone to other sources. As Carla's indicated, we went to the municipality. We had asked that the municipality present to us to give us an opportunity to find out what numbers the municipality has available. Unfortunately, they chose to decline that, but they did send us their 2012 socioeconomic plan. It is online as well. From that, we've had access to some of the population demographics. So the next slide shows the municipal district population demographics. It's a little bit more difficult. We're obviously not comparing apples to apples. The municipality is not counting elementary age children. They don't have that demographic available for us, but we are able to see the district populations for each of the different districts throughout the municipality, as well as the totals. And the other interesting numbers that we were able to receive is the population projections for East Hants. Now, the municipality has provided two different projections. One is historical change projection, so looking at the history of this area and projecting forward, and the other is an exponential growth projection. What we're providing here tonight is the average between those two projections. So again, unfortunately, it's not apples to apples. It's not how many more elementary school kids do you expect in Lance, Milford, Shubenacadie area. They break it down to simply the corridor, but it does give us some context. In our review of the municipal information that we've been provided, it has not been entirely clear of what was considered with respect to those development areas and the growth, the interchange, the development in Shubenacadie, potential development in Lance and Milford. We don't know how that plays necessarily into these numbers, but that's information we're continuing to request. Certainly, we have asked the Chamber of Commerce any information they have to demographics and population projections. We would love to hear it. If there's anyone sitting out there who happens to be a population projections expert, we would love for you to come present to us and tell us how this all works. So we're continuing to seek that information, but I can provide here tonight what we have for population projections. That is a small piece of some of the more I guess the nitty-gritty detail of what we've been looking at. I wanted to put those numbers out tonight, and the committee wanted to provide those numbers tonight because we know that was a topic of quite a bit of the discussion at our first public meeting. We then, as a committee, went forward and we brainstormed some possible options for consideration. And I guess I want to make it clear that this was a true brainstorming session. This was whatever you think of, let's chuck it on the list so we can say, we can look at as many options as are available to us. So when we brainstormed, we came up with 8 different options. As we worked through those, once we received more information, we were able to take certain options off the list. And so what we've been left with here tonight, and we're going to kind of run through them, is the 3... There we go. So we have 3, but I'm going to walk through them. So our first option on the table, and these are in no particular order. We don't want anyone to read too much into the way we've structured them. As I say, it was a true brainstorming session. So clearly one option is to close Maple Ridge. Our second option was to close Shubenacadie District Elementary. We looked at a third option came up of closing both schools and making a new school or building a new school. So once we brainstormed these, we took, I guess, the idea behind many of these options to our presenters to find out of whether or not they were feasible options. What we have been told with respect to hinging a closure on a new build is that is not allowed in the CCRSB policy. The policy is very clear that you cannot premise a closure on a build in that the two lists do not coincide, they do not affect one another, so that you can't say, we'll close these two and hopefully jump to the top of the new build list or the renovation list, that those don't work hand in hand like that. So we've been told by the school board that that recommendation essentially is not a feasible one for us to put forth. One of the next ones we discussed and had actually come from the public or the community input was looking at pulling the Nova family office from Elmsdale and seeing if they could essentially move into the unused space in Shubenacadie District Elementary School. Again, when we took this option to the board, there was a few, I guess I will say, issues with it. One is that the Nova family office, which is in the old, what some of us would know as the old Elmsdale Elementary School in Elmsdale. It has tenants in that building, has leases and leases out to such tenants as the East Hants Family Resource Center and the adult learning programs, and that the municipality feels that that is a central location for those very valuable services. So there's a hesitancy really to start pulling out of that building. The other piece that the school board had come back to us with is that in order to simply recommend that we fill the Shubenacadie District Elementary, the unused space, with something different does not comply with the optimization concepts that Carla had talked about earlier, so it doesn't move us forward towards those goals, and therefore would not, from the school board's perspective, not be a feasible solution to the issues we're facing. Our fifth discussion was to change the catchment area to do some redistribution of the children and to essentially keep both schools open and to look at being able to optimize the educational experience and work towards that optimization by doing some reconfiguration. We know that the Elmsdale schools at over 90% utilization right now. That is one that we currently still have on the table and certainly want to discuss with everyone who's here tonight, is what could that look like and how could we move things around that may achieve the school board's goals as well as potentially keep them both open. The next issue we looked at was to push back the decision to extend the lease or to continue the lease on this building. Excuse me. That was another topic of discussion at our first public meeting, and unfortunately at that point we didn't have numbers. We now do. We know the lease buyout on this building is $4.55 million. Some of you have probably heard it on the CBC already. We know what the lease payments to date have been, over $13 million. What we also have been able to do, though, is we do have a copy of the lease, and that we know that in order to extend the lease, what would happen is the buyout is set right now at $4.55 million. If you were to extend for another 5 or 2 more 5-year periods, they would the province, if they wished to buy the school, would have to buy it out for fair market value. So there's no longer that set $4.55 million. It's simply whatever is market value. We've been advised by the company that owns the school that essentially what would happen is if you push that lease out, you're going to spend that money paying your lease payments over those years, and at the end of it have a considerably higher number to have to use to buy this school. As committee, when we discussed that possibility, we've removed it from our list for any real discussion because frankly it didn't seem to make a lot of mathematical sense. There's an Auditor General's report as well that we've looked at on that issue, and essentially, and I'm paraphrasing the Auditor General, so hopefully I have it mostly right, but essentially that financially it doesn't make sense for this province to keep extending these leases and pay much more money or a lot more money at the end of them. So we have taken that one off of the list. We had also discussed to buy out Maple Ridge and to look at a new school in Shubenacadie. Again, that came back to the CCRSB policy that we cannot preface a closure on a new build. So i.e., if we said you should close Shubenacadie but build a new school, there is no guarantee of where the Shubenacadie new school goes on that list, and essentially that recommendation could simply turn into you should close Shubenacadie District School, which is not what we were looking at in that recommendation. Our final idea that we had discussed as a committee was operating a portion of Shubenacadie District Elementary as a school and then to bring in tenants, sometimes referred to as the hub model in this province. Unfortunately, when we dug deeper into that and started to brainstorm these ideas, we are past our deadline for the hub model within this province. The hub model is a fairly structured process that needs to go through, and I'm sure people in the crowd can remember when schools such as Maitland attempted to go through that. It's very structured. There's a number of deadlines that need met, and we were past them, and I believe we were past them before the committee really started to meet. So it wasn't one that we as a committee could consider. Which brings us to kind of where we are tonight. Tonight we're at as I've said, we have 3 kind of big ideas left floating around on the table. Our first one, and I keep saying this, but I think it's important, there's no particular order. We were simply brainstorming and we wanted to get as much input on as many ideas as possible. So one option that's left on the table is to close Maple Ridge. One option left on the table is to close the Shubenacadie District School. And the third option left on the table that we as a committee are considering is to look at some type of change to the catchment areas, some redistribution that is a move from the status quo. It is a move towards optimization because within our terms of reference, that's part of our mandate, but that could still potentially see both schools stay open. Now that we've kind of narrowed it down, and Carla's going to get more into the process of the small group, I'll just touch on it briefly to say what we're hoping to do tonight is to have some conversation about those three potential options, what everyone in this gym feels are the pros of them, the cons of them, the concerns, the information that you can bring to us that we need to be considering on those options, and looking at that and looking for community input on it. I know earlier, excuse me, this is my plug, I know earlier I did say, look, if we have a populations projection expert out there, we would love to hear from you. And I was only part in jest. If there is someone out there who says, I do have some expertise on this, and so, for example, the Chamber of Commerce, who was able to say to us, we do have some expertise, we're able to present on some of these issues. We would love to hear from you. And if you have that expertise or you have some type of knowledge that you could bring to us as a committee, we're going to continue to meet over the next 6 weeks. As Carla's indicated, we're meeting regularly, sometimes multiple times a week, and the more information, frankly, we can get at this point, and the more input we can get from everyone, the better this process will go. So please don't hesitate to contact us. Please don't hesitate to use that email address, and bring us whatever informations, comments, concerns that you can. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Carla, and she's going to give us some indication of how we're going to proceed for the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Carrie. I think you summarized an awful lot of work in a short period of time, and hopefully between the information that I shared and Carrie shared, you got answers to most of your questions. We are going to break up into small groups, and so what we're looking at is a self-selection. Hopefully about a third, and a third of the group will go to the 3 different locations. We're going to have 3 different 20-minute sessions, and in each of the rooms, and we'll try to scurry out ahead of you and make sure that the signs are up so you know which group you're going into first. There is going to be a group convening right across the hall in the music room, and the discussion in that room is going to be around the closed Shubenacadie possibility. In the library, it's the closed Maple Ridge conversation, and in the cafeteria is the keep both the schools open and look at changing the catchment areas in order to achieve optimization. As I said, in order for us, our goal here is to hear from you. So we'd like to hear, what about that makes sense? What about that doesn't make sense? Is there another idea that we haven't even considered? So those are the kinds of things we're going to be looking for. As much as possible, I'm going to ask you to try to use a bit of a round table kind of a format so that even those that may not be as outspoken have an opportunity to speak, because we really believe that there's some people who didn't necessarily get an opportunity to share their perspectives at the first meeting, and that's what this design is all about. We want to hear from as many of you as possible. So if you can kindly respect your colleagues and peers and neighbors and allow that to happen, there will be a couple or 3 of us in each of the rooms, and one of us is going to keep time. You will hear at the 19-minute mark, there's 1 minute left for the discussion, and then we're going to ask you to kindly move on to the next room so that you have an opportunity to weigh in on that particular option as well. So at the end of those 3 sessions, so there'll be 3 different moves, a good exercise for you too if any of you have got your monitors on. At the end of that time, we're going to invite you back in here where we just want to do a quick little wrap up and talk about the next steps. Is that about as clear as mud for everybody? Is it clear? No questions about that process? All right. I want to thank the technical support. We're going to be going off the live feed now because of the separate sessions, but I want to thank everybody who's joined from their homes and thank the tech support for being here and making this possible. And if I could ask you to try to self-govern in about a third to each of those rooms, we'll get the discussions underway. Thank you.